Hello, I'm William Moersch. Professor and Chair of Percussion at the University of Illinois. Over the past 40-some-odd years, I have commissioned, premiered, and recorded the majority of the most significant repertoire for the marimba. I invite you to join me next Saturday, January 14th at 12 noon U.S. Central Standard Time on the Valley Percussion Festival's Facebook page, hosted by Gilbert Garcia. I will be discussing many aspects of music and the marimba, including repertoire, tone production, practice methodology, sight reading, and more. I look forward to seeing you then.
Hello, guys. It is great to see you today. Super stoked about today's stream. Um, we're committed. We're committed ever since Valley Percussion Festival started as an actual live event 35 years ago. The whole purpose was to bring world class, and not just world class, but strive to bring the best in world class education. So that's been the commitment since day one, and today is definitely a proof of that. Super stoked about our guest artists today. Before we go on, guys, we invite you to check some of our previous podcasts that we have done. Anything percussion, drum set, uh, from Who's Who, being presented from Who's Who, Steve Gadd, Ray Luzier, Rich Redmond, Dom Famularo, you name it, and you're gonna see it. So it's for grabs. So please enjoy. We have some great ones coming up, and the great news, guys, is VPF 2023 will be Saturday, May 13th. Today is the official day where we release the date, and so far confirmed. Tommy Eldridge, Jeff Ostemore, and this morning we finally were able to clear it. Sandy Rennick. So it's going to be one to remember, guys. You got to make sure that you get here to South Texas, follow our pages, and you'll be kept in the loop as far as where it's going to be and all that good information. With that said, I have a very good friend of mine I want you to meet, Mr. Dr. Brad Meyer. How are you doing, sir? I think your mic is off. I think it's in, yeah, we can't hear it. You want to refresh? We were hearing it right now perfectly. We'll try it again. The thing, guys, is today has been one of those days. The reason why we moved the stream a little bit was because of some technical issues. Test. We can't hear you yet. Does your mic have some sort of mute on it? What?
You hear me now? Check, check. One, two.
Now we can hear you. Yes. Yes.
Perfecto.
Good. Awesome.
How
Awesome.
you?
Awesome. I'm doing great, man. But ever since you came on screen, now it's a party.
Yeah, it is. It's go time.
Yes, yes, it is. Brad, thank you. We see in the back room, Will Moersch, excited. Yes, uh, guys, you're in for a treat. Phenomenal human being, down to earth. Uh, wealth of knowledge. He's only, commissioned and recorded, the majority of the most important marimba literature that exists today only. So, wow. So, Brad, what can you tell me, sir, today
About what? What would you like to know?
about Will? Because he's the man of the hour.
Oh yeah, I mean, living legend. Ton of great commissions, amazing recordings, lots of great performances, and educational clinics at PASIC. So this is one of those people that we were lucky to have in our field that's helped bring it through to what it is nowadays.
Yes, yes, and we're so lucky that we're in this business and we coincided in his lifetime. I think so. Yes. Um, well, without further ado, the man of the hour. Hello, sir.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can, and it is a huge honor, sir, to have you in our as a guest artist in our streams. Um, like I mentioned in our intro, the Valley Percussion Festival has always tried to bring the finest in world class percussion education, and today it's proof of that. We are honored to have you here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, and thank you, Brad.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about you. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, we were talking, and life has funny ways of guiding us, right? Or God, if you're a believer, right? Or if you believe in having a calling, and I found it very interesting how you came about being a percussionist.
Yes, well, I gave you the long version when we were talking yesterday, and I only made it
That
through the end of high school, so that doesn't hardly count. But anyway, pick up from there. We were also talking yesterday about father figures and how our professors often become our second father figures. Um, and I would definitely say that was the case with me and my college professor, who was Charles Owen at the University
oh
of Michigan.
wow.
Um, Charlie was the principal percussionist. Well, first of all, he was in the Marine Band for 20 years, U.S. Marine Band in Washington, as timpanist and xylophone soloist, marimba soloist. Then he was principal percussion in Philadelphia for 18 years, Philadelphia Orchestra for 18 years. And then he retired from the orchestra and came to the University of Michigan, which happened to be my freshman year.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so the greatest portion of whatever I've been able to do is thanks to him and the influence that he had on me.
Wow. Wow. And it's beautiful the way, as students, the we look up to our professors, and we keep up with them, and you're right, sir, they become father figures. Uh somebody just posted a message. He wants to say hi.
Uh, hello, Philip. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he loves you. I shared the stream link with some of a group chat that we have in the local educators here, and he says, you gotta watch this guy. He's the father I wish I had. That was his comment. Yes. Um, so today, sir, what do you have in store for us? What will you be covering? If you can give us, I guess,
All right.
a
A
few
synopsis,
topics. Yes, a
brief,
synopsis,
a brief
please.
forward. Well, I put a number of documents into your Google Drive
Okay.
folder, if you'd make those available.
Google Drive documents, guys. I'm going to place them in the where you pressed the link to see the stream in the comments, and then you can go there and download them. I will do that as soon as I exit the screen and he starts with his educational bit.
All right. Um, so I'll start with kind of a general overview, kind of marimba clinic idea of discussion of tone production and music and this, that, and the other. And then I thought I would go into more of a sort of the introductory lesson plan kind of idea that I do
Yeah.
with the first year students here on marimba. And in the documents, there's a clinic handout is one of them. There's also a materials list that I asked the students in Illinois to get. I put that in there because it's got the names of many of the books that I'll be referring to,
Oh,
method books, so on
yes,
and so forth.
yes.
Also has certain recommendations that you might expect. Then there's also what I call Marimba Basics. This is the basics. This is the syllabus that I would hand out to the first year students here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Goes into a little more detail and covers more of the recommended repertoire um, and some practice methodology that I'll be
Yes.
talking about. Then what? Then there's an excerpt from one of the publications that I'm in. This is from the Drum and Percussion Cookbook.
Oh, okay, okay.
Rick Mattingly was the editor of that. And my contribution to that is called A Good Practice Session Should Be Like a Four-Course Meal. And I'll be discussing
Oh,
that. Also a copy of that portion of the book in the documents.
yes.
See, then there is a list of selected publications and recordings of mine. And then there's a list of the 119 and counting commissions that I've done so far.
Oh, wow. Wow, wow. That is awesome. Those are some gold nuggets, guys. Wow. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this with us. Uh, Definitely looking forward to it. I want to ask you one thing before we go into your educational segment, sir. Your mallets. I love them, and personally, I've used them. I've recommended them to other educators, and in the all Texas All State process, I've had success with my students, and a lot of my friends that I've recommended them have had success with their students in getting them to advance to the Texas All State bands. And uh, you know, can you give us a little bit of a background on why and how, and give us some background on your mallets?
Well, thank you very much, but I'm sure there's a little bit more involved than just my name on the mallets and getting the students into the further rounds. So,
The
that's what it
concept
is too.
behind it. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
All right. Well, my great appreciation to Innovative Percussion and all the people there uh, in first of all approaching me and second of all working with me over the years, uh, and then agreeing to introduce an update to the line of mallets. We started off. Well, let's see. How much background do you want?
Uh,
Probably
well,
not too much.
as far as the sound, what you had in mind, and how you came to it eventually, because I'm sure there were some trial and error as they were designing it for you, and you were giving them some guidance.
Yeah, very definitely. So, I discussed most of the credit should go to Chris Long, who was
Okay.
the mallet technician at the time with Innovative. He's since moved on from there, but he was there for a good many years. Um, and I discussed with him the concept that I had in mind, and then he sent any number of prototypes back and forth
Okay.
for quite a while.
Yeah.
Um, so the first line of mallets is the 501 through 504 series, which have acrylic cores,
Yes.
latex tubing over that, and reasonably soft but durable yarn.
Yes.
So those fall into what I would call a two-tone mallet kind of design,
Yes.
so that if you play soft, you hear no core sound at all. As you play harder and play louder, you hear more of a brighter sound because of the core. So that was the original concept. Um, and then over the years, I started becoming also interested in rubber core mallets,
Mm.
which are more of a single tone kind of
Mhm.
mallet. Um, and a rubber core mallet pretty much stays about the same tone color regardless of the dynamic level.
Yeah.
So the newer set, the 511 through 514, are rubber core mallets.
Okay.
Um, and I think for the most part, I've switched over to using more of the rubber core than the synthetic
Okay.
core in my current playing, but
Yeah.
they have their advantages and their uses
Yes.
both ways. So I carry all the full set of both
Yeah.
in my mallet bag, but lately I find I tend to use the lighter gray ones more often.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I've used both the hard ones, and then the acrylic, and then the rubber core. The acrylic ones, uh, a two mallet piece that I remember, it just brought it to life. I put it on the kid's hands, and I was like, okay, that's the mallet you're gonna use. It just made it sing. It just gave it life. Yeah.
It can certainly add a little more brightness, more of the
Mhm.
highs along the way.
Yes, and it was more on the upper range of the
Oh,
keyboard, so it helped. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, good, awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, sir, people are here to see you, not me, and Brad. In this case, Brad has been our guest artist here before, and amazing. But today, you are the man of the hour, sir. So, Brad, what do you say we
Well,
exit stage left?
why don't you stay in while I switch the camera, since I
Okay,
have
let's
to
do
do
that.
that. Yeah, just in, yeah. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's try this. Okay, that's good. And the microphone. Let's go to the web mic. All right. Can you still hear me? Are we good?
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
Okay. I'll migrate over here.
So to our viewers, guys, feel free to comment your questions. I will make sure that we get them uh, to our guest artist, and he will be able to answer. So don't be shy. I like to think that by your participation with your questions, you get to customize the podcast to you, to what you need, and that's the whole idea, right? To get this across. Uh, you want to play a few notes just so I can tell you. Perfect, perfect. Yes,
Okay.
perfect, perfect. Well, I say we exit stage left, Brad, and we let him be. It's all
Right.
yours, sir.
If there are any things that come in through the chat, let me know, because now I'm far away from the monitor.
No, I will. I'll pop on the screen and I'll let you know.
Okay.
When you play something, sir, when you play something, just wait a few seconds so that the mic can adjust and we won't miss your first words after you play.
All right.
Okay.
Will do.
Thank
So, welcome. And what I thought I would talk to you today is my general approach to the marimba. And as I say, these are all covered in the documents that you can look at later on, in case you're trying to take notes or you want to go back and check something. So the first comment that I would make, I think one of the most important things about percussion is in our tone production and really getting a beautiful sound out of every instrument every time we play. I would say the definition of being a very fine percussionist is being able to produce exactly the right sound at exactly the right time. Everything else is gravy. Right? So on the marimba, the first way to approach that is to train yourself to play consistently on the sweet spot of the bar all the time, every note you play. And the sweet spot is going to be ideally directly in the center of the bar, right over the tuning curve, symmetrically between the nodes. And in the case of the accidentals, since you can't always get there, you want to play on the extreme end of the accidental. And as a visual aid, I found with younger students, it helps a lot to take two pieces of soft white acrylic yarn and stretch them down the instrument. Hopefully you can see these. The natural bar, you just catch it in the spring, as close to the center of the bar as you can get, stretch it down the instrument, loop it 2 or 3 times around the bar chord at the high end. So now it's marking the center of the natural bars all the way. The accidental bars, take another length of the white yarn, tie a loop in the end. There's usually something in the center of the instrument frame that's holding it together. On the Adams, there's a nice wing nut right there on each end of underneath the end pieces. On a Musser 250, there's the gold cross pipe that has little looped pins to hold the cross pipe in place. You can catch the yarn onto that. So bring that yarn up from the center of the instrument over the ends of the accidental bars. And in this case, you don't want the yarn to be right on the edge of the bar because it'll fall off. So move it about 1/2 inch further away from the player at each end of the instrument. So your target here is to be directly on the white yarn on the naturals and to be not on the white yarn when it's on the accidentals, but on your side of the white line. So you get the center of the mallet, the important part of the mallet, right on the edge of the bar. Right? Not on the yarn and not halfway between the end of the bar and the node. So that's the first point. Next thing is to make sure that every time you play any note that you're on the correct spot. Whether you're playing with 2 mallets or 4 mallets. When you're playing with 2 mallets, this means that your mallet position should always be exactly the same way that you play the snare drum. Side by side, not right over left or left over right. If you do that, then you're automatically moving away from the ideal spot on the bar. As soon as you play a C major scale, you can see instantly whether someone is following that idea. You want every strike to be right on the white yarn. Right? As opposed to this, you hear the difference in the sound? It's shriller, thinner. You really don't get the quality that we're after. I would also apply this to playing a tremolo. Instead of keeping this position for a tremolo, when you get this sound, mallet side by side, roll your wrists out so that your thumbs are at a 45-degree angle and the mallet comes back at 45 degrees. You know, if you're playing snare drum, your thumb is horizontal, the stick comes straight up. If you're playing bass drum, the thumb is vertical, the stick goes 90 degrees. We want 45 degrees, so the mallet goes at 45 degrees and the 2 mallets stay out of each other's way, and you can play a roll. Both mallets in the center of the bar, as opposed to this. You hear how the sound is much richer and more focused when it's coming from the center of the bar? That's what we're after all the way. Now, there are some instruments are different. All right, you should adjust to wherever the ideal sound is for the instrument that you play. I usually play Adams or Yamaha, so I would go for the centers of the bar. I will say that on Marimba 1, the sound for me seems to be slightly better just off the center of the bar, but still within the resonator shape. Now, there are 2 exceptions to this basic rule, moving away from brands of marimbas. In the highest register of the marimba, the top octave, I would not play on the ends of the accidentals, but go for the center of the accidentals just because the bars are so short up there, especially on a musser, for instance, where the bars are so short, there's very little wood on the outside of the node. And the other exception would be in the lowest octave of a 5-octave marimba. As you get down into this bottom octave, let's take a step back and discuss the fact that in every marimba bar, there are 3 pitches that are tuned in there. There's the fundamental, there's the overtone 2 octaves above the fundamental, and then there's 3 octaves and a major third above the fundamental. All 3 of those notes exist in every bar of the marimba. The lower register, however, is the only place where you can really start to hear those overtones. So if we play right in the center of the bar, or let's demonstrate first, here's the fundamental, or the mix of all 3 actually. Here's the 2-octave overtone. And I probably can't get it, but so we have this note that you just heard, 2 octaves up. And if you listen really carefully, you might be able to hear that note. So if you're playing in the lowest octave of a 5-octave marimba and you play directly in the center of the bar, you will actually be dampening the fundamental slightly and increasing the 2 overtones. So in the lowest octave of a 5-octave, the recommendation then is to play just off the center of the bar, but still within the resonator shape. Another point, stand far enough away from whatever instrument you're playing in percussion. You always want to be so that you're reaching out to the instrument slightly. Your elbow should always be ahead of your shoulder. It's not great to have your elbow directly below your shoulder, and it's terrible to have your elbow behind your shoulder. That means you have no lateral motion whatsoever. And on the marimba, obviously, you need a great deal of lateral motion. So step back You want to have your normal extension of the mallets. When they come down, they should be right on that line in the center of the naturals. You reach out slightly to get to the accidental. Too many players that I see stand so close that their elbows are behind their shoulders. They're playing in the center of the bar, but as soon as they get distracted by watching that person waving the stick over there or trying to read the music, their elbows move forward, and lo and behold, now they're playing up close to the nodes, which is not what we're after. So be conscious of that. I once heard it described, someone should be able to throw a basketball between your arms when you're playing, or a beach ball was the original version, but it depends how large you are. All right, when you're playing with two mallets, you want to adjust the fulcrum of how you hold the mallet for the register of the instrument that you're playing. If you're playing in the middle of the register, think of using more of a second middle finger kind of fulcrum. So you're not all the way up at the tip of the thumb or the index finger, but you're a little bit more with your middle finger. This register. If you're playing in the low register, Fred Hinger, former timpanist of the Metropolitan Opera, recommended using a little finger kind of fulcrum so that we're really holding the mallet as far back as we can in our hand. And this is a better fulcrum, which is more tuned to the low register. And I'm actually releasing the mallet slightly with my thumb and index finger to really use that little finger. Conversely, as you go up into the high register, move the fulcrum all the way to the tip of your thumb, and you really want to think of pinging the note. Whereas if I use a middle finger fulcrum, it has a little more thump to it. And if I use a rear finger fulcrum, it has almost no pitch at all, just totally thump. Notice also that as I change the fulcrum position, I'm changing the speed of the stroke. So in the higher register, where you want a more articulate, more pinging sound, use a faster stroke as well as a front fulcrum. In the lower register, use a slower stroke whenever possible, and a rear finger fulcrum. What else? Oh, yes. All percussion instruments, always think of the stroke coming from above the position of your wrist to the position of your wrist. Turn this way to make it more obvious. Right? You want to raise the mallet, you want to come down to your wrist. You should never strike below your wrist. In many cases, this is aided by having an instrument where you can adjust the height, especially for those of us taller individuals. So try to avoid, as I say, this is often particularly a problem with Stevens grip, where your hand tends to already be above the mallets, and a lot of people will play in this kind of manner instead of getting their wrist down as low as possible and starting above the wrist. It's true for all the percussion instruments. In fact, many of these comments are. Let's see. All right, I spoke about the roll already. Oh, yes. Also, with all percussion instruments, we want to match the speed of a tremolo, a roll, to the register of the instrument that we're playing. Snare drum or bongo being among the highest register that we have to play, we need a very fast, dense roll, which is why we usually end up using a multiple bounce roll for a snare drum, or probably on a bongo, if we're using sticks, that is. And as you go further into the middle of the register or into lower register instruments, you need to use a slower roll speed to allow the instrument to ring. This is true on timpani. This is true on moving from snare drum to tom-toms to bass drum. This is true on a 5-octave marimba, moving from the high register to the low register. On any instrument, think of the sound that you want as being a singing, sustaining tone. You want to disregard the tippy-tippy-tippy-tippy of the roll as much as you can. And find a roll speed where that pitch sounds as smooth and as sustained as possible without what I would call bumps in it. So if you roll too fast, you'll hear this kind of a sound. Hear how there's this oscillation? Same thing, it's a little bit more obvious on timpani. So adjust your roll speed to the register, slower in the lower notes, faster in the higher notes. Of all the pieces that I've premiered and played over the years, I think the hardest thing that I ever had to play is in Erwin Bazelon's Suite for Marimba. Erwin Bazelon's partnership that he wrote for Jonathan Haas and me for timpani and marimba. Near the end of the piece, there's a whole note on high C, tremolo, fermata, crescendo from triple piano to triple fortissimo and back down again. Just keeping a fast enough roll on that high note for that length of time took more calories and more energy than anything else I've had to play. Try it sometime. Let's see. Again, as I said, match the tremolo speed to the amount of resonance and the register. Now this will change not only on every different instrument that you play, but also every different room that you're in. Whatever the acoustics that you're in may or may not have what we call standing waves between any two parallel surfaces that might amplify any particular pitch or pitches. So you want to really be responsive to the acoustics, where you're playing. And on a certain day in a certain room, the F sharp 4 might bring out incredibly, and on another day in a different room, sound totally dead. So always really pay attention to listening to your sound and adapting as necessary to get the best quality at all times. What else? Articulation. In percussion, for the most part, we don't really change the length of the note unless we can use either a pedal of some kind or our hand or a mallet to cut off a note. We tend more in most of the instruments that don't sustain for a great length of time, the non-metallic ones for the most part, or perhaps timpani. When we talk about changing articulation, we're not so much talking about altering the length of the note like any other instrument would. What we do is we change the quality of the attack of the note. And so in percussion, we're basically dealing with two different variables. We're dealing with the height of the stroke, which controls the dynamics, and we're dealing with the speed of the stroke, which controls the articulation. If you're trying to play a staccato attack, you need to play a very quick stroke and come off the instrument as much as you can. And that's where I get this idea of pinging, especially on the high register. And if you're trying to play a very legato note, you want to use a slow stroke as you can. This is even more obvious on timpani, where we talk about a legato stroke on timpani. You should just be using the speed of gravity and nothing else. So there's no throw involved, just letting the mallet fall on its own. So those are some overall concepts. And probably the most important one of all is to sing everything that you play. Sing a melody, sing a rhythm, and sing legato for the most part. I often chuckle internally whenever I ask a student to sing a snare drum excerpt and they sing da 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 da, as opposed to da 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 da. So sing everything. The primary goal of an instrumentalist is to make their instrument sound like the human voice. So if you're not sure how to play a phrase, how you want to shape a certain phrase, or what the affect that you're after is about some portion of the music, sing it first and experiment with different phrasing. And if you have any business being in music, you should recognize immediately what the correct phrasing is, just because it feels correct and everything else doesn't feel right. And after you've decided what the proper phrasing should be, then teach your hands to produce that same sound out of the marimba. Don't teach your hands to play 4 different versions only to discard 3 of them. That's a waste of time. So efficiency becomes an important part in all of this. All right. Next, I thought I would go through my approach to some of the basic technical studies that we deal with. The first one that I recommend is the George Hamilton Green 50 Lessons. Also, when you're working on pure technical studies where you're going to be doing a lot of repetitions, I would recommend not using those wonderful William Moersch yarn mallets or anyone else's. And instead, I would suggest the IP Ensemble 360 rubber mallets for all of your highly repetitive practicing. There's no sense wearing out the yarn prematurely, although my child's college fund would thank you. Use the rubber mallets for a lot of this next stuff. So the green lessons. Charles Owen, who I study with, took the original version of these lessons, which is mail order, from George Hamilton Green. For $1 a week, you received a 3-page lesson in the mail. When I started my lessons with Charlie at Michigan, he had a stack of photocopies that he handed me. And only in 1984 or so did they collect them into this published bound volume that you're looking at. A few important points when you're working on the green studies. Find a tempo. Well, let's back up a step. The goal in the green is twofold. You want 100% accuracy, and you want as much velocity as you can maintain 100% accuracy. So starting from there, the goal in the green is you want to take a tempo where you can manage that. I would suggest, say, lesson 1, starting at perhaps half note equals 60, maybe half note equals 80, depending where you are. Whatever speed you can think about striking each individual note 100% correct, and you can play it for 2 or 3 minutes, as he says, or 10 times, or whatever the requirement is. Then you want to use a consistent tempo for the entire first 2 pages of these lessons. Don't slow down for the hard ones and speed up for the easy ones. Steady tempo. The only exception to that is when you're playing one of the exercises that involves double stops, and there you go, half tempo. So your hands are moving at the same speed. All right? The 3rd page of the green lessons is always a ragtime. It's introducing the concept of playing novelty ragtime. On some of the lessons, the 3rd page works at the same tempo as the first 2. Other times you need to adjust a little bit, but make sure you're playing a steady tempo all the way through the whole ragtime page. Also, well, I'll back up another step. On the first 2 pages, for each of the exercises, study it for a bit and figure out what's the logic behind this exercise. Is it based on diatonic motion, diatonic sequence, something like that? Diatonic meaning the scale, the major scale usually. Or is it based on a chord progression? Then particularly when you get to the ragtime studies, the goal here is that Green is trying to teach you how to improvise in the style on a chord progression. So reverse engineer it and figure out the chord progression for each one of these ragtime studies. They're often very similar as you go through the page, slight variation. Let's talk about chords. And when you have access to the documents, look at the ragtime lesson 1 page, and you'll follow what I'm talking about. If we're thinking in Roman numerals, the most common chords are 1, 5, and it's sort of in the order of their importance or their occurrence. 1, 5, 4, 2, 6, 3, 7. Almost never 3 or 7, at least in this situation. Okay, and 5 might also be 5, 7. In other words, a dominant 7th chord, root 3rd, 5th, and flat 7. So looking at the first ragtime study on page 8 of lesson 1. Now, the other thing you want to be conscious of here is these chords often occur in inversions. So don't automatically look at the lowest note and think that it's the root. If we look here at the first ragtime study, the first 2 measures are on the same chord. It happens to be what? A C major 1 chord. The next 2 measures are on a similar chord or the same chord for 2 measures, but it's not a B chord because that would be a 7, highly unusual. It's in fact first inversion of a G major chord or 5. The next pair of measures is not a D minor chord. It's added to the previous G and D. So now you have, previous B and D. Now you're adding an F natural in there, which creates what? Creates a G dominant 7th chord. So now we've gone from 1 to 5 to 5, 7, back to 1. The next chord is not an E minor. It's a C major in first inversion. The next chord, F and A, is part of the 4 chord. The next chord, the G and B, part of the 5 chord. The next chord back to C. So what I ask my students to do is not only to be able to play through this exercise, but also to speak out loud the chords that are involved. So don't write the chords into the music. Just be ready to say them out loud just before you start. And my common procedure is, imagine you're working with the world's worst bass player, me, who's going to be playing a bass line underneath these, and you have to call out the chords before they happen. It's good practice to work on your musicianship and to be able to recognize these chords faster. And I'll also let you on a secret. If you're familiar with what the chord is supposed to be, it can help you know what notes you're supposed to be playing. All right, so the other aspect of the green is that you want to be constantly moving the tempo forward, as long as you can maintain 100% accuracy. As I mentioned before, a good starting point might be half note equals 60 or 80, and moving toward 100, moving toward 120. You might be in a situation on a daily basis, and I would recommend that you keep a practice log. Today, I'm working on lesson 1. I'm starting at tempo equals 60 to the half note. I played through it. I did great. All right, I'm going to kick it up to 63 or 66, let's say, if you're an old school metronome person like I am, as opposed to 65. You play through it. Also sounds pretty good. Oh, I'm getting confident. I think I'll kick it up to 72. Well, I missed a couple notes. All right, so that's good for today. Tomorrow, come back, say, well, I know I did it at 60. I know I did it at 66. I had trouble with 72. Let's start at 66, go to 72, and probably you'll be able to do it, and go up to, what's next, 80. So we're doing kind of a 1, 2, 3, or ABC idea each day. So we come in and we do A, tempo B, tempo C, and then we do tempo B, tempo C, tempo D, and so on and so forth, stepping forward. So on a day-by-day basis, you should be able to slightly move the tempo ahead and maintain the complete accuracy. That's the point with the green. The other book that I would recommend is Lee Stevens' Method of Movement. Doesn't matter how you hold 4 mallets, it all applies. It's all the same basic principle. You know, you can definitely read the opening of the book, but have, as I say, an extremely large grain of salt whenever you're told this only works with Stevens' grip. Mechanics are pretty much the same in all the grips. I actually play with a modified version of the Burton, where I've adopted several of the Stevens principles. Among those, birch shafts, moving to the ends of the mallets, having the mallet separated, rotating so that my thumb is in more of an up position. This is kind of what I call a hybrid grip of the Burton and the Stevens. And lo and behold, Emmanuel Sejourné, French vibraphonist and percussionist, plays exactly with the same grip. When we met years ago, we compared and said, my brother. So in the Stevens, in the back of the Stevens book, there is a daily practice guideline. I've extrapolated that a little further so that it includes all the exercises in the book. It takes the 4 basic stroke types that are happening in the Stevens and says work on these 3. So the first level is the first 3 from single independent, the first 5, I think it is, from single alternating, the first 3 from double vertical, so on and so forth. The Stevens has a much wider tempo recommendation. You're not going to be making daily progress. It's more of a year-to-year kind of progress on being able to handle the tempo variations. And the only thing that I would really put my spin on it is, as opposed to the recommendation of transposing, Lee points out that each exercise is written more or less in C major or something approximating that. And he wants you to transpose through all 12 keys. Excellent. He suggests transposing by half steps. I suggest transposing by whole steps. It's a lot easier on the wrist and elbow motion. So start on C and play a C whole tone scale. Then come down to B and descend in a B whole tone scale. Back to C. All right. As opposed to, you'll notice, particularly when you're playing one of the major third exercises, C major, D major, E major, F sharp, A flat, B flat, back to C, D, B, A, and so on. Make sure that you're maintaining the major third and not switching to minor third on certain pitches. Okay? So that's my advice for working out of the Stevens book. Then, since you've been working on all these technical studies, you need to play some actual music. So two of the sources that I would recommend, for many years I used Bart Quartier's Image. In more recent years, I switched to using Rebecca Kite's anthology of lute and guitar music, which is the one that you'll find listed on the materials list. So the point of all this technical study is to really be learning to play music and to phrase and so on and so forth. So I won't go into the details there, but you can read it in the document materials. Okay? Skipping ahead to another point, the idea of the practice session being like a 4-course meal. So the 4 courses, depending whether you're American or European, appetizer, main course, salad, and dessert, European. Appetizer is warming up. Okay, that's the portion before you do anything else. You want to make sure that your muscles are limber, your brain is in gear, you're ready to go. Something that I noticed in terms of general warm-up practice, I found it's not enough just to run green exercises or something like that as a warm-up, unless you get something involved, usually involving transposition. Somehow you want to get your brain involved in your warm-up. So one of the things that I came up with is to go through the modes. And this is in the Marimba Basics. There's a section called Modes, version 3.0. There are 7 classical modes. I've added 1 synthetic mode to that to have a round number of 8. So those are, now most people learn modes by starting on C, going up in a C major scale. So you have Ionian, C to C, Dorian, D to D. I'm not sure I can even go back and remember this. Phrygian, E to E, Lydian, F to F, Mixolydian, G, Aeolian, A, and Locrian, starting on B. I think that's a terribly ineffective way of recognizing the modes. I would suggest think of any major key as being Ionian, C major, then modify 1/2 step at a time. So from Ionian, first we go to Lydian, which is sharp 4. Then we go to the synthetic scale, Lydian flat 7, which is sharp 4 and flat 7. Then we lower the 4 back to natural 4, and now we have Mixolydian, just flat 7. Then we have Dorian, when you make a 3, go to flat 3. Then the 6 goes to flat 6 for Aeolian, 2 goes to flat 2 for Phrygian, and the 5 goes to flat 5 for Locrian. So as a quick example of that, good way to start this is to go up and down 1 octave in the same mode. So Ionian, Lydian, Lydian flat 7, Mixolydian, Dorian, Aeolian, Phrygian, Locrian, and right there you double flat 2, and now you've modulated up a 1/2 step. And you do the same thing in all 12 keys. As you get better at it, go up in one mode and come down in the next. So we're going to go Ionian, flat 7, Ionian, sharp 4 and flat 7, natural 4 and flat 7, flat 3 and flat 7, flat 3, flat 6 and flat 7, flat 2, flat 3, flat 6, flat 7, flat 2, flat 3, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7. We cadence on flat 2 and we modulate up a 1/2 step. So a quick demonstration of that. Let's see. I'll do the changing each time. I stopped on D-flat Lydian in order to discuss with you. So the full-blown version of that exercise is to do 3 octaves up and down in triplets at 120. There. So on and so forth. So now I just made it to the beginning of the D flat. So I came up with that, first of all, because I wanted to really learn my modes a little better, but also because I didn't want to just sit there and wave my hands back and forth for 5 or 10 minutes and have my brain totally go to mush, because I was thinking about, well, what am I going to have for dinner? What am I doing tomorrow? All right. The whole point of this was to keep your brain involved about, all right, this is what I'm doing right now, but what do I have to do next? Which is a key element of proper performance in music. This is one of my philosophical bents. As a performer, you should exist a little bit in the present, not at all in the past, and totally the rest in the future. You should always be conscious of what's coming next. What am I going to play next? What is someone else playing that I need to respond to? So on and so forth. The audience, on the other hand, exists primarily in the present, a little bit in the past, and not at all in the future. So it's your responsibility as a performer to signal to the audience not only what's coming, what should you be expecting, pay attention. You should also be emphasizing this is important. You need to remember this because it's coming back later or whatever. All right. So that's just a little bit of time warp theory that I like to discuss on occasion. All right. So that was all about the appetizer course. The main course of any practice session should be whatever your goal of accomplishment is going to be that day. Learning a new piece or starting to work on a new piece, learning the next section of a new piece, solving that problem that you haven't been able to solve yet, technically, about what's happening at that moment in whatever piece you're playing, that sort of thing. Whatever the key element of what's my goal to accomplish today. Always start a practice session with a clear goal in mind. Well, I have this much time today. This is what I expect to get done. And ideally, you'll have 2 or 3 goals and you might only get 2 of them accomplished. Much better than having 10 goals and you only get 2 or 3 accomplished, or having 1 goal and you get it done in no time at all and you're not sure what to do next. So try to be clear with yourself about what it is that you intend to do in any particular practice session. Now, obviously, the amount of time that you have to practice in any particular day can be modified accordingly. As you have this particular amount of time, you can modify your game plan. The next section that I would call in our 4-course meal here is salad. All right. Now, vegetables are good for you. Salad is good for you. This is where I would do sight reading. And a couple things I would comment here. One is the comment that you should practice every day that you eat. First of all. Second of all, you should sight read every day that you eat. So sight reading, the key thing to be aware of when you're sight reading is that sight reading is not primarily a solo activity. It's not a solo testing situation. It's not usually a solo, you're on the spot, play this all by yourself situation. Sometimes it might be. But the vast majority of times, it's an ensemble experience. Your band or your orchestra passes out a new piece. They say, let's read through this, so on and so forth, which means that the key aspect in sight reading is do not stop. Start the piece with everybody, end the piece with everybody. Do not stop, do not turn the time around, do not get lost, so on and so forth. If you must, drop out for a note or 2 or 3 or a beat or whatever it takes, and then come back in the right place. Right? No one is necessarily going to yell at you or going to come after you if you miss a note here or there. If you're recording, it's like, all right, as long as you got the roadmap down from beginning to end, we'll go back and punch in, and you can edit playing the right note, so on and so forth. So in sight reading, key thing, do not stop. Second thing to keep in mind, music is much like speaking or reading. It's vocabulary. You want to be familiar with all of the vocabulary to the greatest degree that you can. When you sit down to read a book or the newspaper, you don't look at individual letters. You probably don't even look at individual words. You're looking at entire groups of words and phrases and so on and so forth. And you can also, to a certain extent, predict what's coming next because you're familiar with the vocabulary and what the common usage is. Same is true about music. You start off learning the individual notes. Then you start learning the common ways that those notes are put together, the common harmonies that those notes involve, and so on and so forth. And the better you get at it, the more familiar you get with the vocabulary, you can start to recognize harmonies, as I spoke before. You should also start to be able to predict, to a certain extent, what's coming next. If you really start to develop some sight reading skills, you should be able to read a measure or so ahead of what your hands are actually playing. And the only way to get better at sight reading is to do it on a regular basis. So the methods that I use, in the document materials, there's a list of many suggested books that you can use to work on your sight reading. You can actually grab any etude book for any treble clef instrument, would be a good place to start. I spent a day at Carl Fisher Music in New York before they closed, going through every method book, etude book they had. And there I gravitated toward trumpet. There's a whole collection of trumpet books by Sigmund Herring that I found very useful. Now, I do every other week I have a group sight reading class at the University of Illinois. We put 8 marimbas or so in a room, 16 players, 2 to an instrument, and we read in unison through a bunch of materials. What I use are 2 books for saxophone by David Height called Melodious and Progressive Studies, Book 1 and Book 2. We'll tend to go through these, usually a book a semester, and then we start over again. The key thing here, when you're sight reading, open it up. You need quite a stack of music, to really do this properly over a long period of time, because you want to be looking at everything for the first time. So you open up the music, you glance through the entire thing. Don't take more than 15 or 20 seconds. Look through, recognize the clef, the meter, the key, anything that might be involved. What you're looking for is something that you do not recognize. Don't try and air marimba or air drum your way through note by note from the beginning. That's a waste of time. And if I were having you sight read and I saw you doing that, I would ask you to start immediately to play, just to cut you off from that kind of activity. Look all the way through. Look for things you don't recognize. And also look for anything to the roadmap. Look for repeats. Look for a DS al coda. Look for a DC. Look for something that indicates how the roadmap's supposed to work. Then look for a key change or a harmonic shift or a metric shift or something like that you might not have seen before, and spend your 5-10 seconds looking at it a little bit more carefully. Then start at the beginning. Give yourself a tempo that is musically appropriate within the range of whatever it's suggested. I have never been in an ensemble situation anywhere where they said, all right, you're playing through this for this first time, let's do it at half tempo. Never happens. It's always, let's read through this once, then we're going to record it. Always at the proper musical tempo. Everything has to be there. Start at the beginning, go all the way to the end. Do not stop, do not turn the time around. When you get to the end, look back and analyze. How did you do? Did you get 90% of it right? That's excellent, but it probably means that this material is a little bit too easy for you. Did you get 30% of it right? That's not so good. Probably means this particular material is too hard for you. Did you get 60% of it right? That's okay. Look back, see what it was that threw you off. Don't practice it out of context. Just look at it, say, what did I do wrong here? Oh, yes, I forgot to hold that accidental across or something like that. Then go back, play through it one more time from top to bottom, ideally correcting whatever mistake you made. Then turn the page and go on. So never play through it more than twice. And the second time is only if there's something that you need to fix. This is why you need a stack of material. Ideally, you'll go through that entire book, put it on the bottom of your stack, take another one off the top, and keep going. Ideally, it'll take you several months or years to work your way all the way through that stack of music. Another tip, whenever possible, try to sight read with someone else. It's a lot harder for you to stop if someone else keeps going. And I know this is kind of a conundrum, but try to have a sight reading partner who is slightly better than you are to pull you ahead. Now, you can't both be better than the other person, so you figure that one out. All right, and then in our 4-course meal, the next thing is the dessert. The dessert is where you want to reward yourself and enjoy music. Enjoy really playing something that you already know, that you can play well, that you enjoy playing, just to show this is what I was doing all that hard work for the last 15, 20, 60 minutes. This is what I'm striving for, is to get that piece to this point where I can just play it and enjoy the fact that I'm playing beautiful music. Great. Very well. It's a better choice of words. Right? So that's the dessert. Now, yesterday, when Gilbert and I were doing a pre-discussion of this, he asked me how much I practice. And I gave him probably a not very accurate answer, saying I don't practice. The point is, during the course of your life, I've been playing the marimba for about 53 years. During the course of your life, the way you practice and the amount you practice is definitely going to change. In high school, I practiced 3 hours a day, every weekday, on the marimba, without fail. Got into college, I kept that up for quite a while. Got sidetracked at a certain point and fell away from it. After college, I moved to New York City to seek my fame and fortune. After a while in New York, I decided that I wanted to do my New York solo debut recital of newly commissioned marimba music. I went on to do, 3 or 4 New York recitals while I was there. In preparing for those New York solo recitals, I practiced 6 hours a day, which seems like a lot, but it's because I realized at a certain point in my preparation, if I was playing 6 pieces on that program, I needed to spend an hour each and every day on each one of those pieces. And only when I had finished that did I allow myself to go back and work on any piece further than that 1 hour. I found that before I set up that kind of rigidity or formal system, I found that I might focus in on one particular piece, and 2 or 3 days would go by when I hadn't played anything else, and then those pieces would suffer because of that. So that's the point where I came up with that. Then I got married, I had a child, I ended up with a full-time university job many years later. And along the way, in my college days, to back up, I hated timpani, absolutely hated timpani with a passion. I studied it, but I would always be practicing timpani and say, I could be playing marimba right now. So I never really thought myself as a timpanist. How many years was that? 30 some odd years later, I found myself here in Champaign-Urbana. I was offered the timpani position with 2 orchestras in town, Sinfonia da Camera and the Champaign-Urbana Symphony. So now, as I say in one of my bios there, I have discovered a love of orchestral timpani that I never thought I would have when I was 18 or 20. So now I see myself primarily as a timpanist who plays a little marimba from time to time. And timpani, to quote one of my great influences, Ben Herman in New York, who was the extra timpanist with the New York Philharmonic during the Missouri years. I think also during the anyway, during a certain period when Roland was the timpanist in New York, Roland Koloff. They were on a European tour. Ben was the timpanist. He was at a banquet, and his patron guest turned to him and said, "How do you practice on tour?" He said, "I don't practice." And as an orchestral timpanist, I would say that's, to some degree, that's true. I found that if you learn how to play timpani well, you don't need to practice, except for those rare moments of repertoire where there's a complicated amount of pedaling that you have to do. To just play the basic repertoire, in my opinion, is not as necessary to practice on a daily basis. So as a marimbist, I tend to sort of work for deadlines. If I know that I have a performance coming up, I put in considerable hours to get it to the scale that it needs to be. If I don't have any performance coming up, I don't tend to practice marimba that often. However, now that I've set up something for March, I'm going to be back into it after recovering from a horrible influenza that I had for the last month. Anyway, so my point is, especially for the younger among you, try to get in a solid number of hours every day. My expectation of the university students is that they register for either 2 credit hours or 4 credit hours, depending whether they're music ed or performance. And we expect them to spend that number of hours in the practice room every day. All right. So, that pretty much covers what I have to tell you. 2 other things that are in the documents. There's a list of publications and recordings if you want to know more about me or things that I've done. Let's see. Anthony Cerrone was the editor of Master Technique Builders for Vibraphone and Marimba. He asked, I think, 20, 25 players to contribute a 2 or 3 page technical study, sort of like the green lessons, our versions of the green lessons, or whatever we wanted to put in. I put in some nice warm-up exercises that you might consider. Sort of my version of, I guess you might, have a look at it. I thought they were fun. There's the rest of the book, the Drums and Percussion Cookbook. Again, I think they're, I don't remember now, 30, 40 different percussionists and drummers who were each asked to contribute a chapter of their choice on the theme, presented in the theme of a cookbook. In other words, here's the title, it serves this many people. These are the ingredients that you need. This is what you do. It was edited by Rick Mattingly. The Cambridge Companion to Percussion, edited by Russell Hartenberger of Nexus fame and University of Toronto. I did a chapter entitled Marimba Revolution, Mallet Instruments, Repertoire, and Technique in the 21st Century, which is sort of an overview of the last 50 years or so of marimba development. Again, these are not only chapters that I contributed that I would recommend that you read, but also the rest of the books to see what everybody else contributed. I would highly recommend. And then the most recent one just came out a couple weeks ago by a former student of mine called Opinions on the Marimba, edited by Greg Gianascoli. This is a similar idea where Greg interviewed, I think, 25 different marimbas of different generations, really just talking with them about their background, their approach to the instrument, anything else they wanted to contribute. That's just come out, and I highly recommend that you find a copy of that and read it. I'm still working my way through the first copy of, as we speak, not as we speak, but concurrently. And then the last thing in the documents that I put in is a list of all the commissions that I've done to date. I was inspired by Keiko Abe, Japanese marimbist of great fame. When I was a young marimbist and I had just started college in the early 70s, Keiko Abe's first recording that was released in the United States came out. I found it in a cutout bin in a bookstore for $1, LP, vinyl. I was blown away, saying, this is a completely different way of approaching the marimba. I've never heard anything like it. And the first thing I did was to write to the composers in Japan to ask for the pieces. Among others, Minoru Miki's Time, Akira Miyoshi's Torch 3, the Teruyuki Noda's Quintetto Matinata for marimba, 3 flutes, and contrabass. I immediately wanted to play all this music. And somewhere along the way, it struck me, Keiko Abe, here's this marimbist in Japan who is commissioning living composers to write pieces for her. And the next thought was, someone needs to do this for American composers, with American composers. So that was really the origins of my whole project, which I began in 1980. Oh, actually 1975. Well, that wasn't a marimba piece. That was a percussion piece. 1980 was the first marimba piece that I commissioned. And I'm still at it. And you can see the list of how far I've gotten. And the next big piece that's on the works is Japanese composer Akime Naito, who wrote a beautiful solo piece, Memory of the Woods, for me, and then a beautiful piece with choir for Makoto Nakura, which then I recorded, called 5 Waka Poems. And now Akime is working on a new piece for me for marimba and string quartet, which we expect to premiere in the fall of this year. So that'll be my next big project, is preparing that one. That's what I have to say. So now I'm going to go back to the chat room. So what do I have to do here? Oh yeah, switch this back.
Wow. That was I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years worth of college education. That was thorough. Wow.
Well, I hope that was useful for someone.
Very, very, and all the handouts, and then the way you went through it. It's I mean, thorough, in depth, gold nuggets. I liked
what a
I liked
long-winded teaser we have here.
I liked when you said practice every day that you eat, sight read every day that you eat, and I placed it in a comment, and then Phil Johnson wrote, he only drops gold nuggets of wisdom. Yeah.
Along those lines, my favorite one from Charles Owen is every note a pearl.
Every note a pearl. Wow. So play every note like a solo,
Every note, like every note should be a pearl, perfectly formed, absolutely beautiful.
Oh wow. I had heard play every note like a solo, but every note like a pearl, it's wow.
Well, that may explain String of Pearls, the marimba solo.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I make that connection. That's
Yes.
String of Pearls is David Lang, or who is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I would say that more than anything from Charles Owen, I learned not only an appreciation for the beautiful sound, because that was what Philadelphia Orchestra was all about, and also, just blank. Oh yeah, also phrasing, musical phrasing. I rode off to Japan and started. First thing I did with Charlie in college was to learn the standard marimba concerto, the Crescent. I came in knowing the Crescent, so I learned the Mio and I learned the Kirka. And we didn't know about the Sarmientos until years later, but that's also from that period. And Charlie had played all these with Philadelphia, and I'm not sure he did the Kirka. I don't know. But then, as I mentioned, I discovered all of a sudden this Japanese music. So I started bringing all this crazy Japanese music into my lessons with Charlie. He'd never heard them before. But he was always able to say, I don't think that's the best sound right there. Or can you shape that phrase a little differently? Or something like that. He would always have a musical comment that was incredibly valid, even if the music was completely unfamiliar to him.
Oh wow. I wanted to ask you something. When it comes to and I like to ask this question to just about every artist or educator that comes through our event, whether it's live streamed or in person, uh, note accuracy. What are your suggestions for note accuracy in the marimba, whether it's two mallets or four mallets? What can a student do to enhance that, part of their playing?
Note accuracy is probably the bane of all of our existence. Everybody misses notes at some time.
Yeah,
I think Lee probably misses fewer than some of the younger players than most people I know. But nevertheless, we have good days and we have bad days and everything. The
yeah,
important thing is more: are you making music? Are you saying
yes,
something? You're getting something across. Now, you can practice to try to minimize,
yes.
moving away from perfection. Um, I've always been an advocate of what Vida Chenoweth advocated, and many of George Summer's been before her. Is that accuracy only comes with slowing the tempo down. So that you should only play whatever you play. You should only play it at a speed where you can get everything right, all the pitches right, all the phrasing right, all the dynamics right, so on and so forth. And then you gradually increase the speed as long as you can maintain the rest.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's always been my approach. I know that there are those who say that that doesn't work uh, for certain things, and that's true. Every now and then you might find a passage that rather than playing, say, the entire section of the piece, you should back up. When I get a new composition, especially back in the New York days when I was playing a lot of music where the ink was still wet on the page before finale, um, I might not have a finished piece from a composer until a week before the concert.
Sir, it looks like some of our viewers are having trouble listening you. Um, can you
Am I
check
hitting the table? Is that causing a problem?
your mic?
Oh, they're not. You're not hearing my voice.
Yeah, I think it's maybe how far you were, because now I can hear you better.
I
Is
think
that
it's
better, Phil? I know you commented.
this the mic, or is this the mic?
There,
The second one.
there. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Try and be closer. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So when you're first looking at a brand new piece, what I would usually try to do is open it up in some way so I could spread all the pages out at once on the floor and see the entire piece at a glance, and then really study the whole piece and understand how the structure of the piece works and how the musical content of the material works and so on and so forth, and where the section breaks happen to be. And I don't like playing from memory. I don't memorize easily, so
Oh.
I tend to play from music the vast majority of my performances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I am actually looking at the music, believe it or not, even if I do have the piece largely memorized, I'm still referring to the music as much as anything to the dynamic and the phrasing content, um, and a little bit about what comes next and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you're practicing something, you never want to practice a break in the phrase just because that's where the page turn happens to fall. If you learn something with a break in it, it's going to be terribly hard for you to get that break out of there later on. So always
Yeah.
try to play a phrase to its full completion or a section of the piece to its full completion. Um, don't allow page breaks to interfere with that. So that would be part of what I was looking for, spreading this all out.
Yeah.
Also, back in the day before iPad, um, I would try to figure out where can I make an unobtrusive page turn here
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
if it has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
How can I repaginate this so that the page turn occurs between sections rather than in the middle of something?
Yes.
Um, and then for the most part, then I would look to see what's the most difficult part of this piece, and that's the first thing that you should start practicing. Um, Now, this is probably after another initial step, which I'd say is try to read through the piece from beginning to end at least once, just to get as much in your ear and in your head about how the whole thing works, and then go back and start working on smaller sections of it. And in those cases, would use this idea of starting off extremely slow and figuring everything out and being able to play through the section and then gradually increasing the tempo.
Mhm.
And that's usually been the way. The other way, as I say, some advocate, and I've used on some occasion, but not nearly as often, is to play very small sections at tempo, like only a few notes, and then gradually increase the number of notes that you're still playing at tempo. So every now and then you find some passage that tends to work better that way. But from my experience, it's more
Yeah.
common.
Wow.
Uh, I've got a question. So something that I think is really important to talk about, and I think percussion gets better about, is talking about sound production, tone production, and I think it's gotten better through the years. But you probably experienced quite a few, as I think we all have, like high schooler and early college student who you play in the center of a bar, you play off center, you know, close to the node, and they hear the difference, but they don't have a lot of internal motivation to kind of fix that, or they lack that kind of sound quality because to them, you know, center to off center isn't a huge difference, unlike, you know, an oboist who has bad tone versus an oboist who has good tone. Bad tone on marimba is still moderately good overall. So how do you go about helping, you know, young students kind of get that mental significance for changing so that they have a much better overall sound?
Well, that's the first reason that I came up with this white yarn trick.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
used that too. I love that. It's super like visual, but for me, I find that when the yarn goes away, they still
okay.
have trouble kind of recognizing with their ear early on. So do you tell them anything? Do you have them do any exercises? Do you explain anything to them that maybe helps them?
Well, before I leave the yarn, one of the other things that I didn't get into this time is it also applies when you're playing with four mallets. So that all four mallets need to be on the optimal spots of the bar, and in particular, be careful about the D major third, for example, where your D might be in the center of the bar, but your F sharp is not going to be on the end of the bar. It's probably going to be closer to the note, or your F
Yeah.
sharp might be good, and your D is going to be halfway between the center and the note, and that sort of thing. So really try to be conscious of all four mallets staying on the optimal parts of the bar. And the second step of this is that professionals don't always play on those spots. And the reason that we don't is that we make conscious musical choices. That we want to change the tone color here. We want to change the voicing, you know, the balance of the voicing or whatever it might be. But until you can train yourself to consistently play in the correct spot, you're not ready to start fooling around with I'm choosing to play in a different spot. So that's another part of that aspect. The other part of, I think, proper tone production has to do with, first of all, having a good model in your ear. You have to listen to high quality players. When Charles Owen was teaching cymbals, he was a phenomenal cymbal player. Charlie was the principal in percussion. He played mallets when that was the spot. He played snare drum when that was the spot. He played cymbals when that was the spot. This was in the older school version. Well, maybe no, not so much. Sorry, this wasn't the old school. The old school version is you're the mallet player, you're the snare drummer, you're the cymbal player. You know, you're
Yeah.
the bass drum triangle player. Now it's moved a little bit more in the new school, which is say the way that Chris Lamb has been doing. You know, I'm going to play whatever spot is the most important part, and the rest of you are going to shuffle around accordingly. Um, so when Charlie would talk about playing cymbals, he would spend a little bit of time showing you the mechanics of the way that he plays cymbals and the motion and so on and so forth. And then he would say, okay, now this particularly at Aspen, he was at the Aspen Festival for years. He'd say, go out on top of that mountain and practice cymbals for a couple hours. And
Not a
part of
bad
that,
place to practice cymbals.
yeah, but the other part of that is also listen to his recordings.
Yeah.
Listen to the sound of good cymbal playing,
Yeah.
and then try to match that sound. So the same thing applies to an extent to the rest of the instruments. The other thing that I would say is, and this is part of why I'm always asking people to sing.
Mm.
And I'm at the very beginning, it's like I don't care about the pitch. You know, don't worry about the pitch. Just sing the rhythm, sing the expression, sing the dynamics. whatever, and gradually, okay, now let's get that a little more in tune. Let's get that a little more accurate.
Yeah.
The pitches are. But it's always the same idea: is get the model in your head,
Yeah.
get the model in your
Yes.
ear. And
Well,
then,
do you have any recommendations? Because with the YouTube being so popular, I love how everyone can record something, but as you know, they're not
yeah,
maybe all the highest quality, but there are some great ones out there. Do you have tips that you give your students to kind of what you say about YouTube?
yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tricky one. I'm, I'm, I'm in a generation where, okay, we were first introduced to computers in the 1980s. I got my first computer in 1988 or so, 1986, yeah, I think 1988, but I was already in my 30s. Um, so the whole YouTube thing, it's like, okay, this is great because you can be exposed to a lot of repertoire that you might not come across, but
Yes.
there's also an unlimited of terribly bad performances that are there. So,
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, so yeah, that sounds like an interesting piece, but that's it. Don't model
Yeah.
anything after that. And it was sort of, I don't mean to discourage anybody in this comment, but it was sort of my reaction to Keiko Abe's first record. I heard all this. This is amazing music for the marimba, but it sounds like she's playing with little rocks.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I want to hear this music played with really beautiful marimba tone. And
Hmm.
part of it was
Yes.
that point in time, and part of it was the nature of recording at that point in time, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
it's not being totally fair to her and making that kind of comment, but that was my reaction. Um, and the other part that this is moving away from the question a little bit, but the other thing that came across my mind as I was saying, I want to do a solo marimba recital. I want to present the marimba. Uh, is that I had much more interest in playing new music than playing transcriptions, for instance. Um,
Mm.
but I wanted to present any newly composed piece using the same vocabulary from the Romantic period or whatever that the audience was familiar with. I wanted them to hear a phrase. I wanted them to be able to recognize thematic elements and so on and so forth, regardless of how, granted, there's just extremely disjunct music, extremely abstract music, and less so. But for the most part, especially in my recitals in the 1980s, I was not playing tonal music by any stretch of the imagination. But I
Mm.
was trying to get it to the phrasing of this music was recognizable to the general audience. And the sound of it, the tone quality of it was recognizable. But I wanted to try to draw them into the marimba through that process, even though the music might be a little unusual.
Is that why you warmed up with Rite of Spring as your audio test?
Not necessarily, but
Well,
it was one
I
little tune I picked out early on and never let go.
yeah. Well, and you kind of, you got me thinking about the idea of playing with rocks, jokingly about Abe's early recordings. Something that I think marimba tone production wise that has pros and cons is the marching activity, whether it's marching drums or marching keyboard. And so what have you found with your students that do things like WGI or DCI, especially like entering freshmen usually? Are there things that you find as general rules of thumbs that might be helpful for the audience here to think about taking those great activities, but how they then apply that stroke with some, parts of it there, some taken away to the concert instrument?
Yeah. Yeah, we have that issue up here as well, probably not to the degree that you do in Texas. Um, I hate Kevlar heads. I have an absolute passionate hate for Kevlar. Uh, and I try to use calfskin as much as possible, wherever possible to this day. Um, so yeah, so the coming out of more of a core background is great in terms of discipline and work ethic and probably technical skill and so on and so forth. Um, but it can also generate a huge amount of like forceful downstroke and not much else. And so, yeah, that's usually the first thing that my colleague Ricardo Flores and I are dealing with. incoming freshmen is, okay, it's too much down into the instrument.
Well, do you have like any kind of maybe exercise that you use or a methodology to apply to an exercise that helps kind of, I wouldn't say reverse it, but learns that other skill of instead of down, the more concert lifting stroke. Just
Yeah, well, I would say most of what I'm doing is talking about full strokes. I've never really been a techie in this regard, not necessarily getting into this kind of terminology, but and especially here in my current teaching position, I teach primarily timpani and keyboard, and I don't teach snare drum, or I don't, for the most part. We split the undergraduates up, and they alternate semesters between the two of us. And
but you're obviously out with the marching band, right? Like you do that too, right?
no, I don't have. I have nothing to do with the marching band. I did marching band all through high school. I did 1 year, my freshman year in college at Michigan. I was in the snare line, and I loved it. But that was the end. That was enough. And to tell you the truth, that year, the two things that I love most in sports: scuba diving, which you mentioned.
I love that too.
Although I gave that up after a while, and skiing, snow skiing.
Nice.
And so my year in the University of Michigan marching band, when they went to the Rose Bowl, I went skiing in Colorado instead. But anyway, so it's kind of the same thing here, especially the music ed students. We're after, yes, you need to do a couple years in the marching band because you need the experience, but the marching band conflicts with both orchestras and with percussion ensemble. So I really think you need to get out of there. Some do and some don't. But anyway, so this full stroke idea for me is primarily legato on timpani, with the idea that you're going to start at a certain place and you're going to totally let the stick drop at the speed of gravity, and then you're going to assist the rebound so it comes back to exactly the same place where you started. And if you're playing a series of legato quarter notes, your hands are going to look like this, and definitely not like this.
Yeah. I call that the rubato.
I call it the toy soldier. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to, this sort of a thing. You're coming right back to the same place. And the height of this full stroke is determined by the dynamic that you need to play. And so in that front, I'm real big about dynamics. Like, how many dynamic markings are there? There's 6 that we commonly encounter: pianissimo, piano, mezzo, forte, fortissimo. Some composers go beyond that, but there's basic 6. So on any instrument, train yourself to play those 6 dynamics. And this came out of a cymbal exercise that I created. Play 6 whole note cymbal crashes. Pianissimo, at a slow tempo. So it's sort of like crash, And we want 6 beautiful crashes that are evenly spaced in terms of the dynamic spectrum, and so on and so forth. And you can tell by the time they get to the second or third one, particularly third one, are they going to make it?
By the end, they're just
is it too compressed, so they're never going to get loud enough, or is it not compressed enough, so they're never going to be able to play loud enough?
Yeah.
Whatever that big one is. And then it started there, and then it's like, okay, now take that same exercise to every instrument and figure out, what do I have to do for this instrument in order to establish these 6 dynamic levels? And then and this was your reaction to for some reason, an earlier phase I had in my head, the dynamics are absolute. Or no, it's the other way. All dynamics are relative.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's really the case. It should be, here are my 6 dynamics. And in this situation, do I need to expand that a little bit, or do I need to compress that a little bit? Or is this just a mistake? It says mezzo forte, but I get the hand every time I play. So I should change this. This should be, piano or something.
Yeah.
So that's also part of it. And again, going back to the idea that volume, dynamics are controlled by the heights of the stroke, whether it's with cymbals or whether it's on a drum or whatever it happens to be. And that our default version should really always be a beautiful legato stroke. It should be a full sound. And then on a case, then for musical reasons and parameters and so on and so forth, you modify that as appropriate.
Mm.
But
Wow.
the place I think where that, I think timpani is the place where it's most obvious
Yeah.
as far
Mhm.
as being able to hear a difference between different types of stroke and what the result is, because it's so low and it's so resonant that the roll speed thing is down in the range of really makes a difference. You know,
Yeah.
my studio just has running jokes. It's like, whoever plays whatever they play, Bill's going to tell them, Professor Moersch is going to tell them, you roll too fast on the low note.
Yeah.
Roll slower on the large drum. That's
Well,
what
I'm curious because, even though it's not, marimba, with snare drum, do you encourage a lot of no snare practice so that students can hear the tone of the drum better, or is that something that
the
just
point.
kind of whatever?
No, I haven't. Usually, if I'm working with a student on snare drum, it's primarily a graduate student or an upper class undergraduate student. Someone who's gotten to the point where the marimba and symphony side are already covered and we're bringing something extra in, or it's preparing for the recital piece or something like that. So I don't necessarily do let's hear it with the snares off so much, although that's a very good idea to listen to the sound of the drum. I'm also pretty particular about exactly what the drum should sound like
Yeah.
and how it's tuned and so on and so forth. So I also have a reputation around here about being the only one who can tune a Pearl Philharmonic snare drum in 20 seconds and have it sound amazing.
That's a great skill before an orchestra concert and you run on stage with your tuxedo buttoned up.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're playing on instruments that other people play on, and
Yeah.
students play on, and have
Oh,
any number of,
I do a lot of high school touring, and I do a 30-second tune up of every snare drum, and so I've got 10 seconds I still got to get to your level.
Okay, all right. But at the same time, for instance, one of the most common things that I'll say this about somebody's snare drum roll is that they're using too much pressure, and I'm hearing too nasal a sound. It sounds like this. That they're using too much pressure, and they need to let the stick work more. Let the stick do the buzz. That sounds simple. Don't dig into
Mm.
same thing about digging into the head and stopping the
Yeah.
stick from buzzing.
Well, I'm going to steal that because I'm going to plug that I have a TMEA snare drum fundamentals clinic this year,
Mhm.
and I'm going to
Yeah.
use that nasal metaphor. And
Uh-huh.
so, everyone come out and hear that advice again from me.
Yeah.
Be my guest.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that one, Brad.
Thanks.
Yeah. What's your you got me curious, sir. What's your scoop on tuning a concert snare drum bottom hit versus top hit?
Okay. Um,
We got away from marimba, didn't we?
Yeah.
okay.
Just a tad.
I've done it all. You want to
Yeah,
talk about
exactly.
hammer dulcimer, zither, cymbalum?
Yeah, I saw that hammer dulcimer you had. That thing was gorgeous.
Oh, in the studio. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I played on a dozen movie soundtracks, doing mostly dulcimer
Wow.
Oh.
out there. And the best one, one that's the most, well, two that are most obvious. The Michael Collins, the one with Liam Neeson in it. This is all from the '90s. Has a lot of dulcimer in it. I did a song with Sinead O'Connor. That's a lot of dulcimer right there. About
Wow.
Michael Collins, the Irish revolutionary. And the other one is John Grisham, Time to Kill,
Okay.
Matthew Conaughey, and some others. There's
Mm.
just a little bit of dulcimer exposure in there.
That's fantastic.
But the first one I did was Interview with the Vampire.
Oh,
Mostly,
really?
Oh.
um, where for the most part, they have me. There's like a 80 to 100 piece orchestra. It's like half New York Philharmonic and half freelancers. And I'm there maybe playing a little extra percussion, but mostly there to play dulcimer.
Wow.
And the dulcimer, oftentimes they'd say, okay, now you stick around after we send the orchestra home. And then I'm
Overdub.
either doing wild stuff or they just say, play something and we're going to put it
Wow.
in somewhere. Do a
Very
sword,
cool.
some little flourish.
Oh wow.
Or, as has happened with a couple things, they'd say, we'd like you to double the first violin parts on this.
I bet you're like, I bet you would for a little more change in the pocket.
Well, it was just part of the job. Yeah. And
Wow.
I was there for more time, so you got paid.
Yeah.
Um, And it'd be, especially a few, I think there's some in Michael Collins, and also it'd be like this running 16th note kind of stuff. Sort of like the Emil Richards story about we want you to double the violin part on The Simpsons.
Yeah,
I didn't do that.
we all know how that turned out.
Yeah. Most interesting one of that nature that I did. Well, there are two things that I did. There's a whole run of Irish Spring, the soap. Remember that, the soap,
Yeah.
the green and white soap.
Yeah.
There's a whole series of commercials where it'd be like the road to Killarney or the hills of Dunlow or something like somewhere in Ireland, and the guy be there and they'd cut the knife into the soap to show the stripe and so forth. I played a tiny little bit of dulcimer for that, and we did maybe 20 different spots in an afternoon. Like here's a 30-second, here's a 60-second, here's a 15-second. And I played the melody and a little filigree on the dulcimer, and then they brought in a tin whistle player who actually ends up playing the melody. So all you hear of me is this little boom at the beginning of the commercial. And they ran that, the way jingles work is you get paid in quarters. Each time an ad agency sets it up to run this jingle for a quarter, then you get paid again. And then if it runs for another quarter, you get paid again. So they ran some version of those 20 commercials for 4.5 years.
Wow.
Oh,
That's good money right there.
Yeah. So for one afternoon, that was great. Yeah.
the
Well, I bet
gift
you
that
got an
keeps on
Irish
giving.
Spring. I bet you got an Irish Spring sponsorship. You never had to buy soap again for the rest of your life, right?
No, that didn't happen.
Ah,
They're always Mountain Fresh or whatever the
Yeah.
slogan for it was.
yeah.
And the other one was a commercial for Mercedes Benz, where the composer
Oh.
decided that they wanted to write for Hammer Dulcimer, which they had never done before.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh wow.
and they asked if I would play for it, and I was leaving for a international marimba tour of some kind in the next 2 days. I said, no, I'm too busy. Can't do it. I said, well, how about if we give you double scale? No, I'm too busy. How about if we give you triple scale? Okay.
Okay. Put me in, coach.
And so then, talk to the composer on the phone. He writes something. He messengers it. This is the old day. He messengers it down to me. I live in Lower Manhattan. It's the hardest thing I've ever seen. It's like a solo piano piece that he's written. I'm going, you can't play this on the dulcimer. It's ridiculous. You know, I have the right hand, the left hand, two clefs. The whole works. Okay, it looks like a modern marimba piece.
Yeah.
But so we go in to record it, and I ended up just recording snippets at a time on many tracks. You know, okay, here's the right hand in measure 3. Here's the left hand in measure 3. So on and so forth. So we got it done. It took a few hours to get the whole thing done, and then okay, thanks. I'll take triple scale on that. Unfortunately, it didn't run as long as the Irish Spring.
Oh
Oh,
man.
I thought you were going to say you came up with the 4-mallet Moersch script for dulcimer
Well,
Yeah.
to play it.
the dulcimer's also gone a lot further in the last few decades in terms of playing. Although even back then, this fellow Malcolm Dalglish, who was based in Bloomington, Indiana, was the killer dulcimer player as well. But there are many more now. And also, it's surprising seeing the number of percussionists along the way who have picked up either cymbalum or dulcimer
Yeah.
to this day.
Yep.
Anyway, we got way off track there.
I can edit that out later. That was fun.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, sir, we are
we've gone long enough.
super honored to have had you today. And just an FYI for our viewers, we have 2 other streams that we're gonna do with Will Moersch on different topics that we talked about. So be on the lookout for that. Today you got a taste of what a wealth of knowledge and experience, and you know, a lot of the good stuff throughout the board. Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate it. Um, Words cannot do justice to how we feel about you attending our stream today.
Well, I'm honored that you asked. I had fun doing it. So,
Brett, you were gonna say
I,
something, sir?
I just want to say the same thing. It was a pleasure getting to talk with you. And I'm also going to plug, I've got a solo recital this Tuesday at 6 p.m.
Yes.
Central Time. Go to Stephen F. Austin State University's School of Music. It's streamed live. Check it out. It's for marimba and snare drum with electronics. And that's
Yeah.
all. So should be a lot
Yes.
of fun. I'm going to try to apply all the things that I learned today from
Eh,
Professor Moersch here.
Oh,
If I could take a moment more, tell us what you're playing.
I'll be playing the ending of Things, which is marimba and electronics. Mountain, which is marimba electronics. Burritt's Offering for solo marimba. Be doing Deuce X Metronome for snare and electronics. Buttonwood for snare and electronics. And then what's the last one? Oh, Obligato for snare drum and electronics. So should be a lot of fun.
yes,
And are
absolutely.
there these new pieces?
Some are pretty new. Yeah.
But there aren't pieces that are premiering.
None are premieres though.
No.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. And,
I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, when is it again? Tuesday?
Tuesday at 6 p.m. the day after MLK Day.
I shared your did I share it? Because I've been sharing some of your stuff, Brett, but I don't know if I shared the one that has the link.
The poster.
Yeah.
I'll throw it up on Facebook again.
Yes, but put it if you can put it on our page, that
Will
would be
do.
great. Yeah,
I will.
please. That way, we
Yeah,
have
thanks,
access to
Gilbert.
it.
I'll be
Yeah.
starting our large ensemble placement auditions at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, so I can't make it.
Well, you have fun with that.
Wish you well with it.
I'll record it so you can watch it afterwards.
All right, good.
Well, that's all for today, guys, viewers. I'm sure you enjoyed it. I was on the edge of my seat here, watching him and catching all those gold nuggets. I know a lot of our viewers that are educators, sir. They play these streams during their classes for their students, so they're gonna definitely have a lot to take notes on. Without further ado, it's awesome to have you here, guys, and we will see you on the next one.
All right, thank you so much. Bye for now.